Welcome, everybody.
Good morning. Good to see you, Joshua. Andy, good to see you. Hi, Terry, Dara, Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Andy, for doing this. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Looking forward to it.
Here.
Morning, Terry. Morning, Molly.
Joshua, how are you going to do this? Is everyone else going to be muted, or can they ask questions? How does it work?
Yeah. So we will have everyone muted and for the presentation, and then probably keep everyone muted and just direct them to the chat to ask questions.
Okay.
And usually Molly or somebody will act as a go-between, Andy, to kind of moderate the questions for you, if that sounds okay.
Andy, so hi, I'm Molly. You don't need to worry about trying to read the questions that are coming in via the chat. I will monitor them, and then I will read them aloud to you, and that also allows me to sort of, if more than one person is asking a similar question, just kind of combine them, that sort of thing.
Sure, that sounds fine.
Great.
I hope we'll have questions. That's often the best part of these things, although, because I usually get to learn something from the questions. Sometimes, often, almost always somebody has an idea that's helpful, so that'd be good.
Andy, what do you prefer? Do you prefer to sort of go through the presentation and then take questions, or take?
Yes, please. Yep.
All right. Good.
Fantastic.
I'm just going to grab some coffee before we start.
Now, Andy, what's your connection with Tim? How do you two know each other?
Well, we have a rich and history together. Goes back to both of us got to know each other in college, and
we'll get started in just a couple of minutes as everybody gets settled into our shared digital space. So glad you're here. So glad you could join us. We will get started in just a few moments. Good morning, St. Columbus. We are so glad that you all are able to join us today for our Adult Forum. Our Adult Forum series is running all this spring, continues through Easter. We will be right here with lots of different topics of conversation and interest. Just as a reminder, a couple of things. One, this is sessions being recorded. We'll post it to YouTube for those of us who weren't able to see it today. During the presentation, if you would like to make a comment or a question in the chat function, we will read them and accumulate them. Molly will funnel them in for our speaker at the appropriate time. It's a great way to interact when so many of us are gathered here. It can become a bit chaotic. So but the chat function is great. All right. Well, let's begin in prayer. The Lord be with you. Let's pray. Almighty and merciful God, whose care and loving kindness over all your creation. Breathe forth into us the spirit of compassion and tenderness towards all creatures you have made and whom you are dwelling. Teach us, O Lord, to look upon creation as a trust from you, that the day may be hastened when all people neither hurt nor destroy anything on your created mountain. In your holy name we pray. Amen. Tim, I turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Joshua. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Great. Well, I am just really delighted that we have with us today Andy Sharpless, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Oceana. And Oceana is the leading organization, or certainly one of the leading organizations in defending the world's oceans today, protecting them. The thing that, to my mind, is distinctive about Oceana is it's not just a bunch of people producing research that says this is what we should do. They are constantly out there running campaigns all over the world to change laws, to enforce laws, that if there are good laws on the books that aren't being observed, to persuade people of the need to take certain actions. And when I mean all over the world, it really is all over the world. They have staff throughout the world. I'm always impressed when I hear about what's going on in Peru or Belize or the Philippines or wherever. I have known Andy for many, many years. It's been a real blessing, one of the blessings in my life. And I can also, as a result of that, testify to his leadership ability, his incredible talents, and his commitment to these causes. And today, he's going to talk about a new venture that they started very, very recently with Google and Skytruth called Global Fishing Watch, which is a way that they can observe and track what's going on with fishing and overfishing of the world's oceans all over the world in real time, and then use that information to take action. And I've seen a demonstration of this technology. It is really impressive, and you will be able to see today how it really works. And it's really very, very cool. It shows us, what technology can do. And there will be time for questions. So with that, let me turn it over to Andy.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Joshua, and thank you, everybody at the church here. I'm impressed that you're also public spirited on early on a Sunday morning, and it's great to be with you. I'm looking forward to doing what Tim has promised you I will do here, and I'm very pleased to have this chance. So I have a slide presentation that I'm going to use to demonstrate this tool called Global Fishing Watch. And then I look forward to discussion and comments and questions at the end of this. And I always get ideas and interesting perspectives in the discussion that follows. So I look forward to that very much. And with an audience that is as talented and engaged as this one, I'm sure I will benefit. So I'm looking forward to this. So I'm going to share my screen now, and unless I get in trouble, we will shortly be looking at some interesting data here. I think I can do this. Okay, are you seeing a title slide? We look good? Okay.
Looks great.
This is the hardest part of the entire event for me. So, okay. So, as Tim said, I'm the CEO of Oceana. We're the largest NGO in the world that's focused 100% on ocean conservation. And we do that, as Tim said, through winning policy change, typically at the national level in countries, as Tim said, in about 10 or 12 countries around the world, chosen because of their strategic impact on the oceans. But I'm not going to, I'm happy to answer questions about Oceana's many activities around the world in our approach, but I'm going to focus today on this new tool that we launched, as Tim said, together with Google and Skytruth, that allows not only us, but anybody in the world who has access to the internet to go see what I'm about to show you. So this is a public interest service, if you will, that Google and Oceana and Skytruth have built and now is standing up as its own NGO called Global Fishing Watch. And you can, at the end of this presentation, go to Global Fishing Watch and use it yourself and see the information that's there. And it's now I'm on the board of directors of Global Fishing Watch, but it's now its own NGO charging forward to make this service available to everybody in the world for free. So before I get directly to that, anybody who's thinking about ocean conservation on a global scale will start out by being a little bit worried that the project is impossible, because when you look at the world's map, the oceans look like a big international place that therefore is very poorly governed. We know that for many spheres of life that countries of the world engaged in international governance procedures have trouble being effective at that. So why is it that we think that ocean conservation is possible in a world where international governance is weak? And I want to just reassure you that there are a few things that make this project more practical, more achievable than you might suspect, and will get you a little bit encouraged, because I think sensible people need this kind of reassurance. You don't want to be talking about something that sounds good in the abstract, but is actually completely impossible in practical reality. First really important thing that you should know about the oceans is that in the 1980s, the coastal countries of the world agreed to put the ocean that's adjacent to their coastal country under national jurisdiction. In effect, they nationalized the coastal zones of the oceans, as shown in this map. So the coastal zones of the world are, in effect, divided up into a series of national territories. And within those national ocean territories, it is the adjacent coastal country which sets the rules on fishing, on oil exploration, on other sorts of extractive activities. These ocean zones have been given a very common sense name. They're called exclusive economic zones under international law. And so the United States sets the rules for its rather large EEZ, exclusive economic zone, by itself, without negotiating with the Chinese or anybody else, and the Chinese do the same off their coasts. So you have the opportunity to save the oceans country by country. Now there are zones beyond these international, these EEZs, and their technical term for them is the high seas, and they are subject to shared international governance, and they are poorly governed. But the coastal zones are managed country by country. And it turns out that the most valuable parts of the world's oceans from a biological perspective are coastal. Most of the biological productivity of the world's oceans and most of the habitat tends to be in the shallower water. So if you were going from a biological conservation perspective, nationalize or improve the governance arrangements for just one part of the ocean, you would do what we've done, what the world has done. They put the right pieces into a more effective governance system. There are also some marine protected areas around the world that are designated, if you will, as parks. Some of them are quite remote. Many of them are quite remote, as shown on this map. And so if you were just interested in kind of that aspect of marine conservation, which is, can I get these marine parks created and actually protected, actually enforced? You would also wonder, well, how do I know what's going on out there? How do I know whether the fishing and the industrial fleets of the world are honoring these boundaries? So this tool helps address both those questions. Two other kind of stage setting facts. Having understood what I just said, you might be reassured. Okay, so we can save the oceans country by country, but there are more than 100 coastal countries. So the project still could seem overwhelming. So we made a list at Oceana of the coastal countries by the size of their catch by weight of wild ocean fish. And it turns out that a relatively small number of countries control a huge share of the world's ocean productivity. 9 countries plus the European Union catch nearly 2/3 of all the ocean productivity in the world. So now all of a sudden you have this much more manageable job. And by the way, it's fair to treat the European Union as one country in this analysis, because under the arrangements that the European Union put in place, fishery management was centralized in Brussels. So it's effectively one country for purposes of fishery management. When you ask the question about how much of the world's wild ocean productivity do you get from the top 29 countries plus the European Union, you get to more than 90% of the world's ocean productivity controlled by 29 countries plus the European Union. So this becomes the strategic framework that you really want to focus on, and that you can go through this list of countries and decide which ones you think have good governance and the rule of law, and you have to make practical judgments about where to go and where not to go. So that's the brief introduction. Now, what are we doing with this new technology tool? It uses a satellite tracking technology known as AIS, or Automated Information System, which was originally developed as a safety mechanism to improve safety at sea. And it automatically sends information, including vessels' location, speed, direction, and identity. This transponder on the vessel sends that to a satellite. And there's a lot of data being provided by these vessels. As frequently as every 2 seconds while moving, a vessel will update itself to the satellite. When it's sitting still, the updates are less frequent. We actually get about 50 positions per vessel per day on average, when they're in coverage. This is a public data set. Anybody can go and license it and use it. And what we decided together with Google and Skytruth is that there would be an opportunity to use this data, which currently covers hundreds of thousands of the world's largest vessels of all sorts, fishing vessels and transport vessels, to analyze when they were fishing. And so we, and to do that, we needed Google, just to make the obvious point, because there's an enormous flow of data that that these guys are providing and that we had to analyze. So you're now looking at something that wasn't, you're amongst the very first people in the whole world to see this. This is a global map of fishing. We've sorted out the vessels that are fishing vessels from the ones that are transport vessels. We've analyzed their motions, the motions of the vessels, to separate when they're fishing from when they're on the driving the fishing grounds. And you're able to see for the first time in this kind of heat map presentation here, fishing all over the world. Not only that, you can see it in motion. So this is showing you fishing activity over the period of time, shown in the sliding bar there at the bottom. This is the year 2017, and you can see it's showing you 1 month of fishing activity throughout the year. So you can instantly see that you're able to start to learn all kinds of seasonal, interesting information about seasonal changes and so forth in fishing pressure around the world. There it is again. And as I said, this is available to the world for free at Global Fishing Watch, which is now its own organization. We launched it in September of 2016. Global Fishing Watch now has 20 different funders and 26 active grants, 2 of which come from governments, Japan and Luxembourg, and there was a grant from Canada, which is likely to come back again. But the most important funders of Global Fishing Watch are private philanthropies. Bloomberg Philanthropies has been very generous, the National Philanthropic Trust, the Marisla Foundation of California, and then Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation all led the way in creating the resources to build this. Global Fishing Watch, we now have 59 staff located around the world, and our 2020 revenue was projected to be about $9 million. What this makes is an information tool, if you want to think of it that way, that is useful to a variety of customers. So governments can use it to make sure that fishing vessels in their own EEZs are authorized to be there, and it can help them pursue the ones that are not supposed to be there and take enforcement action against them. Seafood suppliers and processors who want to make sure that their suppliers or law-abiding fishers can use this tool to check up on them, to make sure that the people that they're fishers that they're using as their suppliers are fishing with places where they have licenses and the seasons and so forth that they're permitted to do so. News organizations that want to check up on whether their local government, their national government is doing a good job at protecting their ocean can use this tool to develop investigative pieces. And we've actually had some very interesting work that on the intersection between forced labor or slavery at sea and fishing activities. This tool has been used, and there's an interesting piece that's research piece that's been published. You can go see it on the Global Fishing website that documents that vessels that the Global Fishing Watch shows stay at sea for very long periods of time. You can the activity of the vessel can kind of signal for you whether they might be suspiciously likely to be using forced labor. And there's other indicators. I'm skipping it over quickly, but it's more complicated analysis than that. NGOs and citizens that are concerned about activity at sea can use the tool, and of course, honest fishers who want to show that they're honest and who want to, prove that they're being honest and complying with the rules can use this to do so. So there it is again. We can already start to learn some pretty interesting things as we use the tool. And I want to show you one thing that's kind of amazing to me still, which is that in addition to seeing this global view of fishing in action all over the world, and you're looking at a view that is tens and tens of thousands of fishing vessels in activity, you also can zoom down and look at a particular individual vessel and its particular history on the ocean. And if you look in that little box on the right, the upper right corner here, you'll see that there's a lot of detailed information about this particular vessel. It's the Fu Yuan Yu Lang 999, and you can see its flag state and its identifier numbers. And you can actually see here where it was fishing and where it was moving around. And so if you get interested in a particular vessel, you have its history available to you through Global Fishing Watch. And as you would expect, this sort of history can be helpful to governments that are trying to do enforcement and actions against fishers that aren't playing by the rules. This particular vessel was caught by the government of Ecuador. It's a refrigerated cargo vessel, and it was caught for illegally transporting sharks and shark fins in the waters off the Galapagos. Galapagos, you will know, are famous for Charles Darwin's activities there. They're also famous as a very biodiverse marine place. They're heavily protected. And what this analysis, what Global Fishing Watch allowed was Ecuador to identify other vessels that had met up with the Fu Yuan and likely transferred to it illegal catches from their holds to the refrigerated vessel. Here's another view that's quite interesting. This is a global view of fishing everywhere in the world. And what this shows, I'm sorry, I want to go back to that. What this shows to me is something that's already a little bit encouraging. So this is a view of a long period of time. So the heat map shows you more fishing pressure than the earlier heat maps we were looking at. And so there's a lot of fishing being shown here all over the world. But even so, you see that there are these kinds of holes within the middle of what is otherwise intensive fishing pressure here in the remote central Pacific. You see an area where there isn't fishing here, another one. Here's over here closer to Asia, you see another example of that. What is going on here? Well, what is going on is that the EEZ boundary is being observed. There is a remote island here, and the EEZ law is that you have 200 nautical miles of national territory around that island. And some of these islands are known to be places where you get caught if you cross into their EEZ without permission. And so guess what? The fleets follow the rules. Now, it's not true for every country. Some countries do a good job at enforcement, some do not. You can kind of see that here. But it is reassuring to me that it is possible that there's an invisible boundary in the ocean water that is being honored in some cases by the fleet. It's not completely in a lawless and illegal place in the high seas, the international remote seas, I should say. Here's another reassuring example. This red box here is a protected area. It's called the Phoenix Island Protected Area, and it's governed by the island nation of Kiribati. And it's a big and important area. It's a World Heritage Site. And it was for many years what we would call the conservation movement a paper park, because although it had been declared, there was no actual enforcement. As you can see here, there was fishing, there was as much fishing occurring within the park as there was outside the park. So it was not actually being protected. Leadership of Kiribati decided that they would actually crack down and enforce their own rules. And so they made the announcement that starting at the beginning of January 2015, you better not be fishing there or they would penalize you. So we use Global Fishing Watch to check and see whether that declaration had any effect, and you're going to get to see what happens here. Watch what happens. So you're looking at the period of time coming up to the deadline of January 1st, 2015, and lo and behold, the vessels left the park and complied. You might wonder a little bit whether they just all turned off their transponders and they're still fishing in there. So we went and double checked using that little box, that capability to identify particular vessels. And we were able to find there were 180 vessels inside. We found 178 of them outside. So we were able to track that they actually left. Here's the before and after, just shown side by side. You know, again, don't be cynical here. That's the point, is that as hard as it seems to believe that you could make progress in ocean management, especially in remote places, especially in countries that are poor, there are success stories. This is a good one. And Global Fishing Watch here is helping to prove the success story. It's not, that's to me, it's one of the aspects of the tool. It allows us to celebrate success. Now we kept watching, and here's an interesting thing that happened. After the protected area was enforced, we're going to see this vessel fishing outside outside the protected area, but watch what happens. It's going to come down, fish outside in the high seas, then transit, and then it's pretty obviously fishing right here inside the protected area in the northwest quadrant there. We presented this information, Global Fishing Watch presented this information to Kiribati, and they then showed the data that we were able to give them to the vessel, and were successful in collecting a fine from this vessel of $2 million for illegally fishing, which by Kiribati standards is an enormous amount of money. It's about 1% of the gross domestic product of the country, the annual gross domestic product, not just their government budget, but their gross domestic product. So a big success story for them. Here's another example. You're looking at Madagascar, and you're going to see a vessel fishing inside the EZ up there on the left, and then you're going to see another vessel shown in red come across, and then the two of them are going to meet in international waters, and then the red vessel will continue to the west. What is happening there? Well, the title of the slide is the answer. This is a transshipment, very likely a transshipment activity, where the fishing vessel that has been fishing inside the EEZ, I can't be certain of this, but could easily be, suspiciously likely to be, meeting up in the high seas with the transshipment vessel, transferring fish that the vessel off Mozambique caught, in order to be able to continue fishing inside the EEZ in excess of its quota, because it won't have to report the fish that it transferred to the transshipment vessel. Transshipment activity, you can see in the little picture here, they have a big refrigerated vessel in the middle, which has huge refrigerators, and the catching vessels meet up with it at sea and transfer to it their catch, and in a way, sometimes illegally. It's not automatically illegal, but facilitates illegal activity. There's also, this is another example. These big refrigerated vessels that stay at sea for a very long time are often associated with forced labor, because they stay at sea for such long periods of time that they violate the labor laws with their crew members. Here's another example of a kind of an interesting activity. We're looking at Chile here, and you're seeing a Chilean fishing vessel fishing inside Chilean waters. And I want you to watch and see what happens here. So here's the vessel fishing. You can see its vessel track fishing inside the EZ of Chile. And then oh my gosh, it does this peculiar thing where it runs in a straight shot way out to the west, out into the international zone, and then goes immediately back to port. What does that happen? What is going on there? Probably he's doing the same thing. He's running out to meet a transshipper at the high seas in order to transfer some fish that he will then not have to report to the Chilean governments. And as you know, and in their efforts to manage their catch quotas. It's not automatic by itself that this is proof of illegal activity, but it is suggestive, and the Chilean government would use this to have an enforcement conversation when the vessel returns to port. What were you doing? Why were you burning all that fuel for no apparent purpose to go out there and come back? The transshipment activity is interesting worldwide. Oceana used Global Fishing Watch to do an analysis of hotspots of transshipment. And there are a number of them. They're shown on this map. We issued a report. And you can see this, the slide shows you where lots of transshipping activity is seen. We found more than 5,000 likely transshipment events between 2012 and 2016 by using a computer algorithm that looked to see when two vessels met up within 500 meters of each other for longer than 3 hours while traveling at less than 2 knots. So you can see how you can use, the power of the computer analysis on this global data set to help you sort out from all this activity all over the world's oceans, these sorts of insights and help you prioritize enforcement activities. Famously, Global Fishing Watch was used by a very distinguished group of academics, researchers, to do this study, which was covered widely last year in the press. What these researchers discovered is that there is a lot of illegal fishing occurring, or was, in the summer of 2017 and 2018, off the coast of North Korea. Chinese fleet numbering 900 vessels in 17 and 718 were fishing without their transponders turned on. So they were a dark fleet, visible only to other forms of satellites. So the analysis compared the AIS data set with other satellite data sets and discovered these vessels were fishing there and intentionally hiding that activity by not having their AIS transponders on. This is during the period when the United Nations had sanctions against North Korea. And so this is suspiciously suggestive of the fact that the Chinese government was violating those sanctions, probably paying the North Koreans for the privilege of fishing off its coast. The researchers estimated the amount of, they were catching squid, these boats, that the amount of squid they were catching could easily have been worth nearly $500 million across those 2 years. So this is suggestive. It's not, but again, it's not by itself proof, but it's suggestive of illegal activity in violation of UN sanctions. Interestingly, it correlates with another phenomenon where North Korean boats tend to be smaller and less seaworthy than the Chinese boats, have been discovered to be fishing not in North Korean waters, but in Russian waters, illegally in Russian waters. So what we speculate is that the Chinese fleet in effect displaced the North Korean fleet into the Russian waters. And actually that created a problem for the North Korean fishers who have these smaller, usually wooden boats that are not so seaworthy, and created, risks. That's, terrible risks for their just safety. Now, how do we make this data set even more powerful? One way we could do that is by adding data to the AIS data set, and that brings in other vessels or brings in more granular view of what's going on. And this slide shows you a data set called VMS, or Vessel Monitoring System data. That's another transponder, another data set. This data set is not public, so you can't just go and license it like we did with AIS, but the governments of the world have it and control its use. We are campaigning wherever we have teams to get the countries that our teams are in to put the VMS data into Global Fishing Watch, and the Peruvians have done that. And you can see in the yellow here, the additional coverage that you get by bringing the VMS data. So there the slide is showing you just the AIS data, and then the yellow shows you the additional vessels, tend to be right up against the coast of Peru there, that you can see when you have the VMS data. We think that the world should move toward putting VMS data in everywhere, and you have to win those battles country by country. But this is an example of how, once you show to a country through AIS data what they can get, we were able to say, well, to the Peruvians, well, look how much better it would be. And then they did the public policy decision to put the VMS data in. Here is a global view of the distant water fleets. There are about 12 countries in the world that have distant water fleets, meaning that they have boats that go far from their home country to fish all over the world. There are about 12 nations that do this in the world. The leading one, the biggest, is the Chinese fleet. But it's not the only one. The Japanese do it, and other countries do it as well. This will give you a sense of their scope, this analysis. So what you're going to see here is that the green heat map shows you the fleet, the Chilean fleet. And as you would expect, it's not a distant water fleet. So as you would expect, it primarily fishes in Chilean waters. I'm going to put this in motion, and you're going to see an orange fleet come in. That's the Chinese fleet. And then you're going to see a blue fleet come in, and that's the Japanese fleet. So let's see what happens as we bring them into the view here. So we're looking, remember, green is Chile, orange is China, there's the Chinese fleet, and the blue is the Japanese. So you can see here what I promised you would see. It's a global fleet in action, fishing all over the world, and putting pressure not just on the high seas, but up against the EEZs of many coastal countries. All right, we're getting toward the end of the presentation here. I want to talk about a nice success story. Here's a map centered on the Pacific, and it involves Global Fishing Watch's collaboration with the United States Coast Guard, which has as part of its mission enforcement against illegal and unreported and unregulated fishing that is done in the high seas under a treaty agreement that the United States is a party to. So even, sometimes the international zones have some effective governance for them. One of those cases is when there is an international treaty that allows parties to that treaty to have to board each other's vessels and to make sure, fishing vessels, to make sure they're complying with the rules. And the United States Coast Guard takes this seriously and does an enforcement mission, I think every summer, where they leave Seattle and they go across the Pacific, monitoring the parties to this international fishing treaty and boarding vessels and inspecting them. Working with Global Fishing Watch, the Coast Guard was able to change its targeting methods for which vessels it boarded, because it had the benefit of seeing, I mean, it had many benefits, but one example, it could see where the fishing was occurring. So prior to Global Fishing Watch, it didn't actually know where the fishing pressure was. So it would kind of, in a common sense way, sail across the Northern Pacific and then come down the western side of the Pacific looking for fishing vessels. Well, with Global Fishing Watch, in real time, as Tim said, it could see where they were. And it had the benefit of the analysis that showed not just when they were transiting to the fishing zones, but when they were fishing. And using that and other related information that Global Fishing Watch provided, these Coast Guarders, here they are in their little Zodiac going to board a fishing vessel and do an inspection. They got a huge increase in their effectiveness. 2019 patrol by the US Coast Guard had 3 times more vessel boardings and an 8-fold increase in identified violations compared to the summer of 2018. The vessels that boarded were from Japan, Russia, South Korea, China, Chinese Taipei, and Panama. They had, violations that were improper marking, illegal shark finning, misreporting of catch, improper use or intentional tampering with the vessel monitoring systems. And about 25 of their violations were serious enough to put the license in question. So this was a big success story that the Global Fishing Watch tool made possible. 2 other examples of how the tool can be broadly applied. You're looking at a photograph here of the North Atlantic right whale mother and her calf. Sadly, these animals are on the brink of extinction under American law. There are less than 400 individuals left. These were once numbered in the tens of thousands. Like all whales, the life cycle of these whales involves a north to south transit where they go south to the equatorial zone to give birth, and then they go north to eat and bulk up. That journey is always made. A mother takes her calf north, like this one does, along the coast of the United States, up into Canada to the eating grounds, and then will come south when she's ready to give birth again to another calf. These animals are called North Atlantic right whales, interestingly, because the whalers named them that because they like to swim on the surface. These whales spend a lot of time right on the surface, as these 2 are doing. And the whalers like that because it made it easy for them to sight and to kill back in the days of sail-powered whaling. It's not good for the whales, though. It's not a good strategy for the whales, not only because it makes you vulnerable to whaling, but it also makes you vulnerable to ship strikes, to be hit by a ship on the surface. These whales their 2 biggest threats now that whaling is over are ship strikes and the other one is getting entangled in fishing gear. And here's a picture of a whale that has been cut by a propeller. You can see this is a female whale where the propeller incisions are right across the top of her back. And then the other side of the slide shows you, the relative size of the whale and the cargo ship that, you know, could encounter this animal. One of the ways you help the whales stop having these kinds of lethal encounters, and sadly, this whale was never seen again. It disappeared, probably dead from the injuries. One of the ways you help them is that you identify the zones where the whales are present in the migratory cycle, and when you have those zones identified, you establish basically speed limits on the boats in those zones during those seasons so that the boats slow down and the whales have an opportunity to avoid them. And so we use Global Fishing Watch to set up something called Ship Speed Watch to help the North Atlantic right whales. And the American agency known as NOAA, everybody in this talk will know NOAA, asked us to build an automated alert system so that its law enforcement and protected species teams would have a list of vessels that are not adhering to the speed limits in those zones. That's being provided to them. So I'm at the end of the presentation here. Happy to take questions and discuss anything you'd like. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Andrew. I'm gonna start working through some of the questions that are in the chat. So the first one is from Dwayne, who asks, does the tool provide info on who is using legal versus illegal fishing methods?
No, it doesn't. I mean, it's a very smart question, though, and it would be wonderful if it could, that is the kind of thing we would be happy to build into the tool if it were technically possible. The difficulty is it is interestingly possible to use the vessel motion information to distinguish some kinds of fishing from other kinds of fishing. So for example, you can distinguish bottom trawling, which is dragging a heavily weighted net along the bottom of the ocean, from purse seining, which is where you would use a circular net to encircle a school of fish. And obviously the motions of the vessels are different, and you can see that in the satellite and you can make that kind of analysis. But illegal fishing activities, particular kinds of illegal fishing activities, if they're not evident by the fact that they're in the wrong place in the wrong season, which of course is a form of illegal fishing, but if you're using dynamite, for example, or you're using just a gear that some forms of gear that would be forbidden in certain zones, most likely the motion of the boat by itself does not give you away, sadly.
Thanks. Next question is from Shelley, who asks, what is the enforcement mechanism for infractions of fishing laws?
Well, it depends on where the infraction occurs. So if it occurs inside the EEZ of a country, then the country will have its own laws and its own enforcement system. Typically, they are fines. Typically, they're not criminal penalties. Sometimes they are criminal penalties for the captains if they're very, very serious, but that's unusual. Usually they're what you would call administrative penalties, fines, or withdrawals of licenses. We like stronger penalties. We think they provide a deterrence service. So we like seeing seizure of vessels and withdrawal of licenses when there's illegal activity. And occasionally that occurs. Under the international, illegal activity on the international zone, tends to be same thing, tends to be softer and more administrative in character. We would like enforcement to be tougher. It's a general deterrence matter. It would be good if it were.
Great. Next question is from Reed, who asks, what can be done to help poorer countries, especially in Africa, protect their shorelines from massive catches by fishing boats from big industrialized countries?
Boy, this is a very important problem that Reed is highlighting here. So just to emphasize the point of his question. So we saw the Chinese fleet, in its scope all over the world, and the other distant water fleets, not just Chinese. A lot of them go up right up against the west coast of Africa in particular, and fish hard against those coastal zones. And many of them violate international law by going into the exclusive economic zone without permission, or maybe under some kind of corrupt arrangement with the coastal government that may not be to the benefit of the people of that country. So this is a problem. First thing that you do is you disclose it. So Global Fishing Watch is a big step toward making, deterring this activity by making it evident to the people of the world and to the people of those coastal countries what's happening. Second thing you do is that if you are a responsible country, you publish, as the Europeans now do, the licenses that the European fleet holds for fishing around the world, and you make public the information that so that people can see which European boats are authorized to fish in which foreign countries and can check up on them. And you have penalties for your own vessels that cheat, that go into fishing in EEZs that they don't have permission to do. International trade law could be a third tool, and we are strongly supportive of international trade agreements, providing strict penalties for this kind of activity. And one of the great things about trade law is that because it affects really important interests in the world, state the obvious. I mean, anything is traded internationally. You have big international companies and lots of money being made. So the international trade law tends to have teeth more than international conservation law does. International conservation law tends to be very weak, truthfully, in its enforcement terms. Trade law is strong. And so we like using trade law as a tool to get enforcement.
Thanks. We have a couple more questions here. Next one is from Anne, who asks, can vessels that lay down up to 3 miles of nets at one time in one place be tracked? My concern is that because of the length of these nets, many species of fish and other marine animals that the vessel doesn't want get caught in these nets that go for miles instead of a short distance.
I like these questions. This is a smart set of questions here. So the issue that is being introduced by this question goes by the technical term of bycatch. And the questioner is right that one of the problems that the big industrial fishing presents to conservation is the non-selectivity of big nets. They catch everything or almost everything that swims in them, and they kill a lot of non-target species. So reducing and controlling bycatch is an important part of making the oceans abundant and productive. And you need to do it. You can't just have, because what happens is when they pull these big nets in, they sort out the target species that they're going to sell from the non-target species, and they throw overboard often the bycatch usually dead or dying. And so you have, nobody actually knows exactly how much bycatch there is in the world, but it could be something like 20% of the mortality that the fishing industry has is in the form of bycatch. So you want to limit it. You can't get it to zero, but you want to set the incentives to control it. And our method is you got to count it, cap it, and control it. You got to make sure that there's not an open invitation to do as much bycatch as you want. So big nets have more of it than littler nets, no surprise, and therefore they should be limited. So the questioner is right. You can focus on those vessels that are using the biggest nets and try to get more enforcement activity on them. It would be good to have observers on those boats watching to see what the bycatch is and counting what the bycatch is. American and the well-managed fisheries tend to have observers on big vessels, one of whose jobs is to watch and monitor bycatch and count it, especially watching for the killing of endangered species as bycatch. I think that on a global basis, what you want to do basically, though, is to forbid the really, really big nets. So the most non-selective nets are these enormous drift nets. Some of them can be 10, 20 kilometers long, that are very, very bad fishing gear. And many countries in the world have begun to make these nets, really big nets, illegal, and to put length limits on them, or to force conversions to more selective catch methods where the fishing fleet can still make money and catch what it wants, but not be so destructive in bycatch.
Thanks. We've, I think, time for one or two more questions. Next question is from Chris Moore, who asks, given the pressure on ocean fisheries, does your organization have a position on farmed fisheries?
Yes, we do. Farm fishing sounds intuitively like farm fishing would be a great solution to the problem of ocean overfishing of wild fish. But the answer is a little more complicated. If you're eating farm fish because you think you're helping save the oceans, you need to know what the farmed fish that you're eating was fed. Okay, so this is a really simple question you need to ask. Are you eating a farmed fish that is a carnivore or not? What is a very common farm fish that is a carnivore that everybody in this call has eaten, maybe within the last month? Farm salmon. Farm salmon is a carnivore. Salmon are like little cats. They want to eat meat. So if you're a salmon farmer, and we know a lot about salmon farmers because we've had a very effective team in Chile for 15 years. And Chile is one of the biggest farmed salmon countries in the world. And a lot of the farmed salmon we eat in the United States comes from Chile. The salmon farmers have big ocean pens filled with the salmon that they're farming, and they feed them ground up pellets that look like dog food, but are made of ground up fish. And in the process, they're taking 3 or 4 pounds of wild fish and converting them into 1 pound of farmed salmon. So it's a reductive activity where you're putting more wild fish in of lower value fish like an anchovy to convert it into a higher value fish called the salmon that you can put in an airplane and fly north to the United States or Japan or Europe. So as a market activity, it makes sense. As a way to feed the world, it's completely counterproductive. You're taking healthy marine protein, anchovies, in the case of very often cases, anchovies, and reducing the amount of that is fed to a hungry humanity. Now, if you're farming, what's a really good kind of farming? Well, clams, mussels, oysters. So, because when you think of what do they eat, they filter the water. They eat basically algae. So I encourage you to eat all the clams, mustards, and oysters as you can, and have no guilt whatsoever. Feel very virtuous, because they are actually really good. They're a form of animal protein that comes from a creature that is actually filtering the ocean. They're making the ocean cleaner. Those farmers are always strong allies against ocean polluters, because you can't farm when there's pollution in the water. So we love those guys and gals. They're friends and they're good. In the middle of these two categories of fish farming, carnivorous fish farming being the bad end, clams, mussels, and oysters being the good end, are the farmers who are farming herbivorous fish that eat grain. And in essence, their role in the kind of the food system of the world is about equivalent to being a chicken farmer underwater. Okay, so if you're farming tilapia, which is an example of that, your role in, if you think about designing the perfect ocean food system for humanity, your role is about the same as a chicken farmer. Somewhere there's a field where people planted wheat or corn or soybeans to be your foodstuff. That's got environmental consequences. The biggest driver of biodiversity loss on the planet is agriculture. That's important for people to remember. So one of the reasons we like promoting ocean abundance from wild marine systems is that that's a food resource that is not connected to land-based agriculture. Okay, if we can make the oceans abundant as a food resource for people, we feed people without driving terrestrial agriculture's expansion. That's a good thing.
Well, Andrew, I think that's a really great place for us to end on. I'm going to turn it over to Caroline Willis, who's going to close us in prayer. Caroline, you're still muted, so if you can unmute yourself, thank you.
There we go. Let us pray. Almighty God, in giving us dominion over things on earth, you made us fellow workers in your creation. Give us wisdom and reverence so to use the resources of nature that no one may suffer from our abuse of them, and that generations yet to come may continue to praise you for your bounty. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Andy, so much. What a fantastic presentation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We will be back next week with the Bishop of Maryland to talk about racial justice and reparations in the church community. So that should be a great one. Would love to see you again in a week. Thanks again.